Good morning, everyone. Slightly different today. We're still talking about handling data and representing data, and the last video was about scatter diagrams. And so I'd like you to spend today's lesson having a little look at a website that I often look at. It's called Gapminder. And if you look here, it's a very simple web address. It's gapminder.org. And it was set up by a Scandinavian statistician called Hans Rosling. He's sadly no longer with us, but his children have carried on his work. And he's very much about informing people about the different ways that we live around the world. So there's two things that I'd like you to look at on this website. And the first is Dollar Street. So I'm going to click here on Dollar Street. Now, I've been to this place before. If you haven't, you'll probably be invited at this point to take a little tour, which you can do, or you might choose to skip that because I'm going to explain how it works. Along the top here, we've got families from around the world arranged in order of their monthly income. So the poorest families in the world you'll find down at the left-hand side, and the richest families in the world are at the right-hand side. And it's not one family from every country in the world. There are several families from some countries. It's very much them arranged to do with their income. And it gives you an insight into how different people around the world live. So I'm going to move this little slider on the right-hand side all the way down. So I'm only looking at the very poorest families in the world. And I'm going to choose one of those families. So here we go, this family are for Burundi. And it gives me a little bit of information about them. They live on $29, that's US dollars, so that's about £20 a month. And you get a little bit of information about them. These arrows here take you to other countries, but if you want to find a bit more about this family, you can click here where it says visit this family. And what it's got is it's got the same pictures from all of the families. So it's got a picture of their backyard, their garden. It's got a picture of their bathroom and their bedroom and their beds and what they use for cooking. And it's a fascinating insight into the way they live. And, you know, I really recommend that you spend a bit of time having a look at that. So let's say that I've found out all I want about this family in Burundi. So if I now go back at the top there, and now let's scroll across to perhaps not the very richest people, but perhaps some a bit more better off people. These perhaps look a bit more like you and I. So here's a family here. It's a couple. They live in the United States, and they live on, remember the last family was $45 a month. These people live on $4,400 a month. And let's visit this family and see how it compares with the family we were looking at. So yeah, their toilet is a little bit more private, and obviously their bedroom and the way they live is very different to the way that the family in Burundi lived. So I'm just encouraging you to spend a bit of time, because I want to go on and use some of this data, a bit of time looking at the differences between the way people live around the world, and it's the sort of thing that you may already have studied in geography. That's the first thing I'd like you to look at. Can you find a UK family in there? And what about the richest family and the poorest family on here? Where do they live, and what's the difference between their lives? Now, the second place I want you to go to, you have to go back to the Gapminder homepage. So you could just edit the page there. The other way to do it is on the right here. Go down to Gapminder, and it takes you back to the front page. And so we've done Dollar Street. Now I'd like to have a look at scatter diagrams. So click on Play with the Data. And this is a scatter diagram with a special difference. You start off with a scatter diagram linking income. Well, we've just been looking at families and how much they earn, but this is the average income per country. and life expectancy on average, how long people in that country live. And every country in the world is plotted with a dot. But you will notice that the dots are different sizes and different colours. So the colours relate up here to where in the world they are. So America's is green and Africa is blue and Asia is red, or whatever colour you call that, and then Europe and Russia is in yellow. And then the size of the bubbles relates to the population of the country. So some countries have got tiny bubbles because they don't have many people living there, and some countries have massive bubbles. And this data is for 2019, but you can do an amazing thing. And sorry, I should say we've got a fairly clear positive correlation, haven't we? Countries where people earn more, they tend to live longer. And you can argue whether that's causation as well as correlation. Does having lots of money make you live longer, or is there something else involved? That's an interesting debate. But have a look down here. Can you see this arrow down the bottom left? Look what happens if I click that arrow. This takes us back to the 1800s, or as far back as they've got this data, and it shows how the data has changed. So, you can see the two big bubbles for China and India, or you can, see how you've got bubbles here moving really quickly. That's the United States. And you can see how things change over time. And there we go. And you can start to ask questions why. So, for example, this big bubble here is China. For a lot of that sequence we saw, China was down here with the low-income countries, but it suddenly shot up towards the end. Did you notice that everyone, I was talking so you probably didn't notice, but did you notice everyone dipped on 2 occasions? Have a look if I go backwards in time. So look, everyone dips there. And then if I keep going back, there's another dip there. And that corresponds with the wars. So First World War between 1914 and 1917 had a big effect on life expectancy. And then the Second World War, although it's called a world war, didn't affect every country in the world, but there were certainly some countries where life expectancy took a big dip. So this country here, Russia, life expectancy really dipped during the World War. So there we go. And do you remember in last week's video, Friday's video, it was Friday, wasn't it? I talked about a scatter diagram comparing child mortality, the number of children who die very, very young, with mobile phone ownership. I said I thought that would be a positive correlation, but it wasn't causation. I don't think owning a mobile phone means your children are less likely to die. Well, we can have a look at that. If I click on income here, I can actually change that axis. And because I did it earlier, child mortality is there. But if I type in child, then child mortality appears. So I can change that axis to child mortality. And it sort of does all the scaling for me. So what it's got here is the number of people who die before their 5th birthday per 1,000 children. I'm going to change this one to mobile phone ownership. So if I type in mobile, down here it's got mobile cellular subscription, cellular phones, that's another word for mobile phone. I'm going to choose that bottom one, which is the number of mobile phones per 100 people. And that gives me the data for 2018. And I note, rather worryingly, that if you live in the United Arab Emirates, there are over 200 mobile phones per 100 people. Don't know how that is, but there we go. But if we look at some of the countries, here we've got Nigeria, where on average 120 people die out of 1,000. That's over 10% die before their 5th birthday. Whereas down here, a country like Japan, it's closer to 2.4. Have you noticed that this axis along the bottom doesn't go up in equal jumps? It's not a linear axis. That's because it'd be very hard to represent it on a linear axis. This is called a logarithmic axis. It's where every jump is not the same gap, it's the same multiplier. A bit confusing, but it just means they can display all the data. Shall we look at pressing play? Now, you'll notice it started a lot more recently. 1978, look, everyone's on 0 mobile phones. Why is that then? Well, because they hadn't been invented. Let's see what happens when we get towards the time when mobile phones first started appearing. Well, here we go. So around the 1990s, we've got a number of countries: Japan, United States, Sweden. That's interesting because Nokia are a Finnish company, aren't they? There you go, there's Finland, Norway. So some countries starting to get mobile phones. Lots of countries still with no mobile phones, because having a phone is one thing. You need the networks, you need the masts and everything to go along with it, don't you? Here we go. Now, I suggested that this would be a negative correlation, didn't I, on Friday's video? There's a definite downward trend. It's a pretty weak negative correlation, isn't it? But there's probably a definite sort of downward trend there. So the second thing I'd like you to do is just experiment with changing these axes. Can you find some interesting things to plot here and here? There are there are absolutely thousands of different things, and they're arranged in categories. So, for example, you can look at all sorts of different things. So I'm going to suggest you spend about 20 minutes looking at Dollar Street and then 20 minutes looking at the Gapminder tool. See if you can make this spreadsheet that I've made, child mortality and mobile phone ownership, and then have a little play and see what else you can do. And then on Friday, we're going to go back to scatter diagrams using some of the data that I've got from this site. Hope you're okay.